Yes.
Mr. Ferranti,
Here.
Ms. Gravellisi,
Here.
Mr. Sinella,
Present.
Ms. Ty,
Here.
Mayor Arrigo.
Here. Dr. Kelly, do we have some folks lined up for public speak?
I can, there are
We can,
attendees. I don't, see anybody with their hand up.
okay, I guess we would encourage anyone who's interested, any participants that are interested in speaking to please raise your hand. We'd like to limit conversation to 3 minutes. And when you do speak, please, if you feel comfortable, share your name and address with us for the record. I do see one hand raised, Dr. Kelly.
Jody C. Yeah. Jody, you can go ahead and speak. I think she has lowered hand, so.
I think she's muted.
I've unmuted her twice. She appears to have lowered her hand. I don't.
Okay.
Jody, do you want to try to unmute and say something?
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Okay.
I don't need to say anything.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, seeing nobody else raising their hand, we will move on to a discussion of the final reopening plans. Dr. Kelly, do you want to kick us off? And then if when members have questions, just raise your hand, let me know. Dr. Kelly.
Okay. I did just check the video, and there was there are 2 new comments here that I can record if you want, Brian.
Sure.
So the first one is dated July 27th. The Revere School Committee members say we thoughtful in planning our school. I'm writing to express my personal concerns about plans to reopen Revere High School in time. To echo the concerns highlighted in the Massachusetts proposal.
Can't hear him.
Yeah, Dr. Kelly, your audio is a little bit
Going in and out.
light.
Oh God. Okay. I don't know. My volume is up all of the way.
That's a little bit. That's better. Yeah.
Like many other RPS teachers and educators across the state, I'm concerned that in-person or hybrid reopening in September will be rushed and unsafe. Along with the MTA, I advocate a careful, safe reopening of schools, including adequate time to plan and train for new pedagogical protocols, adequate funding for cleaning and PPE, and provisions for testing for staff and students. Revere families have already been hit disproportionately by illness and death during this crisis, and the suffering will be compounded during the spikes that will inevitably follow the reopening of the economy and physical preparing for slow and cautious reopening, and the option to return to virtual learning when is necessary will be death. I am terrified to return to school at Revere High School. The building has poor ventilation and the facilities are crumbling in many areas. There are broken windows, cobwebs, and stains in my classroom that have been there since before I began 12 years ago. While I spend plenty of my own time and money cleaning in my own classroom, our shared spaces are often filthy, and no amount of sanitizing spray can make me feel comfortable in that building during a pandemic. If forced to return, I will have to accept changing in and out of clothes every time I go home, moving out of my own bedroom where my 7-month-old baby sleeps, and not seeing my high-risk parents for the foreseeable future. I love my students, but these are not choices that teachers should be forced to make when there is a clear The MPA's proposal will ensure that we have adequate resources to implement the safest strategic possible in-person learning with deliberate phases that emphasize flexibility, caution, and equity as support and consideration. Sincerely, Ann Chalupka, Revere High School. And there was one other question from Maria Romano asking, will the remote classes be more structured this time around? Last time there was no structure.
Okay. Any members have any comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to discussion of the reopening plan. Dr. Kelly, do you want to walk us through?
So I hope you all got a chance to look at the plan. I want to thank everybody who worked on it for the incredible number of hours. They spent really thinking about what would make sense and what would be helpful to our kids and our families, while still making sure that staff and students and everybody involved in the school department is safe. Sorry. And so they worked, as you saw, in 3 different levels. The first was the teaching and learning team that focused on those aspects of a reopening plan. They described a little bit of what a hybrid model would look like with students in 2 cohorts, cohort A and cohort B, where those cohorts would alternate the week. So we envisioned a plan for most of our kids to come back in the day, and and then have 1 week of in-person classroom, followed by a week of at-home learning outside of the classroom. And that it was, even the at-home learning week was intended to be structured and include synchronous learning with some teachers helping students work through their assignments for the remote learning week. As most of you, as you all know, and I'm sure many in the community know, on Thursday, after a second week of COVID positivity rates above 6, there's strong advice that we, instead of doing a hybrid model, move to a remote model to begin the school year. And before we talk more about that, I'll just briefly mention that the full in-person model was not a serious consideration for us because the overcrowding in our schools would not allow us to open that way and still have the necessary social distancing and reduce group community getting together, even in one classroom, if we tried to come back all together at the same time. So our focus was on hybrid, and remote was an option. The full in-person was not really an option for us. It appears right now that we'll be, with the school committee's vote, focusing on a fully remote start to the school year. However, our intention will be to get back to a hybrid model as soon as it is safe to do so. And naturally, we're still working with the Revere Teachers Association. We still have to begin contract negotiations with our other bargaining units. But because the teachers are the largest group, it makes sense to start with them first. And so we're hoping that we can on what that's going to look like and start working in that direction in the coming week. But I'll pause there and just see if there are any questions on the teaching and learning piece of the.
Any members have any questions or comments? Mr. Ferranti?
Oh, Michael, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Assuming that we go back to remote, is there a possibility that the teachers would be able to teach out of their classrooms?
Certainly, yeah, I don't see why not. If teachers were teaching in their classroom, they still wouldn't be worried about a large group of people meeting together. It would be one person in a room by themselves for the most part. If we do come back with teachers in person, that actually would facilitate some of the evaluation pieces. It would make it easier for supervisors to observe the work the teachers are doing with their British classes. And even, as long as people were staying socially distant, there could be some in-person professional development as well.
Does that have to be negotiated for them to go back in the classrooms, even if the kids are there or not?
I would say that that's the respective working conditions that we would want to discuss with the union. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ferranti. Any other members have any questions or comments? Mrs. Rizzo?
Muted.
I'm not muted. Just, realizing the needs and how to prioritize the special needs in the ELL, what does that look like for them? Is it hybrid? Is it remote? And if it is hybrid or in person, what safety precautions are we taking for not just the students, but the educators themselves?
So all of the safety precautions are described in the plan, and we would take those for our special needs and our English learner students as well. We would hope to be able to work out a plan that allows some of our more at-risk students, such as the students in sub-separate classrooms and students at levels into language acquisition, to come in and do some in-person learning in small groups. And the PE would provide for both groups, folks working with special needs who sometimes have.
Dr. Kelly, you're breaking up a little bit. Sorry.
All right. I'm in my office, and I think that I'm having internet problems. But anyway, can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that the PPE we would provide as described in the reopening plan would be more significant for teachers who are working with the severe special needs kids who often have different kinds of toileting needs and other issues that it might be closer contact than what would occur with a typically developed adolescent or younger student. So I don't know if I'm directly answering you, Stacy, or if you want me to say more than that.
Well, does it look like we would go into a hybrid type model for those students? I mean, I just see the pros and the cons of it.
Yeah. We want to offer that to parents, and for those parents who feel like the child would benefit from in-person learning in a small group environment like that, then we can offer it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Again, everything is subject to negotiation, so there is that piece to acknowledge.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Rizzo. Any other comments or questions? Mr. D'Ambrosio.
To follow up on Mrs. Rizzo's, I know the nature of the negotiations, but when would you estimate that we have an answer with regard to the types of resources and model that most students with extra and differing needs in the district, the resources they'll receive and the way they'll receive them? When do you think we'll know?
What do you mean?
Sorry, you cut out.
What do you mean by resources? Do you mean the PPE?
I mean the way in which they'll actually engage in their schooling.
So we are going to survey parents this week, actually, sorry. That survey is almost finished and it's going to go to translation tonight. and then go out to families tomorrow so we can understand exactly where parents are and what they want for their children.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other members? So at this point, the chair will, oh, Mrs. Rizzo. You're muted.
Are we just discussing the learning portion right now?
Right now, we are focused on teaching and learning.
Okay.
Dr. Mokaba, could you look at the message I sent you?
I'm sorry, Mayor, through you, just what type of training will be given to our families to support them with remote learning? I know it said it in the plans, but I was just wondering what type.
So we're obviously going to have to do that remotely because we're going to be in a remote environment. But each school and each staff will set up a training protocol for those parents. It's going to be different at the elementary level than it would be at the secondary or the high school level. But the schools will set that up independently. We have advice from one of our partners at Ariadne Labs that after the school committee makes their final decision about what model we're going to go with today, we make some of the decisions that you're going to make today, that we should transfer ownership from there to the school level so that plans directly that meet the needs of the students and the families at that particular school.
Thank you.
One last question.
Mr. Francie, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Diane, how many days would the parents be able to get the training that they need? And would it be done the same time that the teachers are doing theirs?
Yes, so we would start the training before school actually starts for kids, so that the teachers would have that training the parents would have that training in advance, and there would obviously be multiple times that parents could sign up and participate. You must log on Tuesday at this time. Our goal is to help families, so of course our plan will be thoughtful in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Ty.
I'm assuming there'll be ongoing support as well. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, and we're working with our IT department to set up an IT assistance program for families and for staff.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I saw something that said Mrs. Cavalisi has her hand up.
In the attention section.
Yeah, I think she left and she may be trying to get back in.
Okay. I promoted her. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Somehow I must have been an
I know, I'm
internet
trying to
connection
get
with
over here. I've got 3 phones ringing at the same time.
I got shifted over, so I'm back. Thank you.
Danielle's going to monitor that stuff for us. All right. So further into the teaching and learning portion, you saw 3 sample schedules. And again, I want to emphasize that getting such terrible feedback. Are you guys hearing it?
Yep.
Try muting if you're not speaking. That's better. So a little further into the teaching and learning section, we did put together 3 sample schedules of what school might look like for the elementary, for the middle, and at the high school level. And this is assuming that we're in a remote learning environment. And one of the things that we were cognizant of, or a couple of the things we were cognizant of in developing remote learning is that families need more synchronous learning, where students actually log on and engage in a lesson with their teacher and then have an assignment to do after that. You'll notice that these schedules presented here incorporate pieces like that, some of which are whole group and some of which are small group. You'll also notice that we have invested time for different kinds of asynchronous work or independent work, office hours, they're called sometimes, where teachers can work individually or where students can request additional support from a teacher if they're struggling with something, and that's built in every day. We've worked in advisory time so that we can be addressing the social emotional needs of students as well as the academic needs of students. And we anticipate, as you can see from these schedules, that class periods would be roughly 40 minutes. So synchronous times that they're online with a teacher would be roughly 40 or 45 minutes. And then there would be a break so that the kids aren't going from one Zoom meeting to another Zoom meeting to another one, and neither are the teachers. So that was part of our planning process there. But what I'm describing, I want to explain is something that we're describing the vast majority of our kids would operate under this kind of program that is a little bit more malleable. And we anticipate it's going to start remote. But as I mentioned before, would hopefully phase into hybrid as soon as it's safe to do so, and ultimately would phase back to all in-person learning. We know that aside from those students, we are going to have a group of students who can't come back when we come back hybrid or in person and are going to remain remote. We're working on a separate system for those kids who are going to be remote all year long, where we have worked with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to procure an online learning management system. And we would have certain teachers, perhaps who are immunocompromised themselves, who would instruct that fully remote learning environment, which would be separate from everything that I just talked about. It would almost be like its own school within the district, and kids from any one of our schools could attend that school. And our third modality, as we already talked about, would be the small groups of kids from special learning, who have special learning needs or who have advanced English language learner needs, who we would like to see come in fully so that we can make sure that those kids are advancing in their academic program. So I think the language at the state level is a little bit ambiguous, because when I think about having kids in those three different modalities, I still think it's a hybrid program, even though the majority of our kids are going to start in a remote learning environment if the committee votes that way. All right, I'll pause again for questions before I move on to student and family support.
Any members have any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on.
Okay. The student and family support section of the plan identifies a number of the different pieces that we want to put in place to help families and help students. The first one is going to be a coordinated communication effort with families. And I talked a little bit about that before, about moving that to the school level and making the principal be the primary communicator for families. That is mainly because research shows that families engage more at the school level than they do at the district level. And communicating through the building will be more effective in engaging families and students. So we will be moving to that. Here we talk about the first 2 weeks of school, and Michael and Stacy, I think that you both mentioned this, having training in those first 2 weeks for families on how to engage with remote learning, and making sure that we're using those 2 weeks to troubleshoot any technology glitches or technology needs that we want to remedy before the student schedule actually begins. It talks about the daily office hours or check-ins that will be available to make sure that we're meeting individual needs of students and families, and the advisory period to make sure that we're addressing student social and emotional learning needs. We've talked before, and the plan addresses hiring of a parent liaison for each school, and I know principals have begun looking for people to fill those positions. And it talks about making sure that our school adjustment counselors and social workers are on hand and actively engaged in reaching out to students and identifying any who may have a more advanced needs, behavioral or mental health or trauma needs that we should put a plan together for. And of course, we talked about our nurses and the health technicians that will be hired to assist them. At this point, we're going to hold off on the hiring of the health technicians until we know that we're going to have an in-school experience. Exceptions will be made for schools that house any of our in-person programs for English learners or special needs students. And even there, we might look at redeploying our existing group of nurses to assist in those buildings before spending the additional funds to hire health technicians at this time. And I'll pause there for questions.
Any questions from any members? Seeing none, we'll continue on.
The next section of the learning plan talks about special education, English learners, and early childhood. And we're actually still, I want to point out that we're still working on this section. I know that Mr. Mogavero had some updates this morning that he was planning to incorporate just to make it clearer how our English learner students were going to be served in each of the three modalities. But the main point that we wanted to make in this section was making sure people realize that we're paying attention to our special populations and that whatever mode we decide is best for the bulk of our students may not be exactly what's right for these kids. And so we will be, as I mentioned already, looking to incorporate different options for us, for the parents of students with advanced special needs and for our English language learner students. Any questions or comments on that?
Any questions? None? Continue on, Dr. Kelly.
The next section is professional staffing and personnel staffing and professional learning. And, you know, I think the main thing to talk about here is that the commissioner and the Board of Education have given us an opportunity to do spend the beginning of the school year in some intensive professional development with staff. And so we anticipate taking advantage of that with all staff members to focus on three areas. The first is how to be safe and the safe use of PPE and safe traveling in our schools and all of the other safety precautions that we've put in place. The second aspect will be on teaching and learning in general and how that's going to change in the new format that we're going to have, particularly in the remote environment. And then also on how to teach well. What are the pedagogical aspects of effective teaching and learning in a remote environment? So we'll be working on all of those pieces. Again, this is a piece that is subject to bargaining. The school committee has the right to approve up to 10 days, as long as those 10 days end by September 15th. But it is the committee's choice on how many of those 10 days they want to leverage before we actually start school. And I believe that we had originally planned in the fall to have a September 1st professional development day and have students start back to school on September 2nd. We have talked to the union about that start date, and if we wanted to move for staff only to the week before that, it seems like we're going to go forward with the September 1st start date, which would give us 9 staff days that we could use for professional development at the beginning of the school year. And I would encourage the committee to approve those 9 days. I know that it'll probably be Ms. Ty and Mr. Snella who work that out through negotiations, but it's time that we do need, and it's time that the staff needs in order to make sure that we have a solid plan in place. And it's also time that we'll be able to leverage to do some parent trainings and make sure that our students and our families are ready for remote learning as well.
And,
Ms. Ty?
and to that end, you have designed the new calendar that we would need to approve.
You will have to approve a new calendar, and I put a draft one in here for you to take a look at, and we'll be able to talk about that.
Okay.
Mr. Franti? You're muted, Mr. Franti. Mr. Franti, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Diane, are we going to talk about the calendar now or afterwards?
I think it's at the end of the plan. I don't know if you want to keep
No,
going.
that's fine. I'll wait. No big deal. I'll wait.
The next section is on facilities and operations. And, again, some of these are really building specific. So, for example, arrival and dismissal building flow, the building level, folks, the building teams are working on what arrival and dismissal should look like and how we can ensure that students are not piling up at the entrance of school at the start of the school day. And some buildings lend themselves to using different arrival spaces. For example, at the West Riviera, well, now that we're not going to have ELT, their arrival times will be more separate than they had been in the past. So that will alleviate the students at the Wayland School arriving at the same time as the students at Susan B. Anthony. But certainly those schools can also look at leveraging both the middle school and the elementary main entrance for middle school students at arrival, in addition to the entrance off the back near the cafeteria. So they've got a lot of safe options for how they can bring kids into the building. And each school will have to look at that individually and think about whether or not we need to do a little bit of a phasing start for arrival. And of course, this is once we move to the hybrid or in-person learning. Classrooms and materials, we had already made a determination long ago that we were going to stick with the 6-foot distance. And that's how we knew that we could safely accommodate typically 12 students, but in some cases, only 9 or as many as 14, depending on the size of the classroom. And so, when we begin our transition to a hybrid model, we would still use those same parameters, making sure that the teacher space is 6 feet away from the first row of students. Hand sanitizer, we've got on order it's already ordered for every classroom. I actually think it's actually arrived at this point. In addition, we have larger hand sanitizer stations that will be put in high traffic areas of the building, such as the entry to hallways on each floor, the main lobby, and in offices. I know that Carl has made a massive issue of soap and paper towels and has worked with our custodial team on protocols for checking bathrooms every 2 hours. So those pieces are there for when we do come back. And the same thing with the PPE. It's all been ordered or already arrived. and we'll be present when we're able to come back in an environment that's safe for us to do that. The HVAC system, I know the engineering firm that we talked about last week has completed their inspections. They were here right through last Friday. And actually, let me just check my email and see if I've received an update on that. I don't have an update on that, but I will check with Mr. Svensson when we get off of this call and see where the status of those reports are. Food services, isolation room, cleaning. We've talked about this, the safety drills. I know Dr. Galucci has an appointment with the chief of the fire department to talk about safety drills. Of course, we're going to continue to conduct those. We're going to talk about training students and the difference between a drill and a real emergency. So we can drill with 6-foot separation between students so that we can practice leaving a classroom and going through the nearest exit and finding the space where we regroup outside. And we can do that safely using protocols as a practice. We will be emphasizing to students that in the event of a real emergency, they should not worry about social distancing and get out of the building. So those are pieces that we are still working on, but we'll still be conducting as we should once we do have a return to school. And I'll pause again for any questions.
Mrs. Rizzo, we also have something that popped up in the Q&A portion of the meeting as well. But Mrs. Rizzo, go ahead.
So, talking about hand sanitizer, and I'm sure our nurses are on top of things, but will we have a stand-in order like we do for Tylenol for hand sanitizer for the students to use?
Yeah, that's actually coming through the maintenance and facilities department, not through the nurses. So Carl is doing all of that.
No, I think you misunderstood, Diane. In order for parents can refuse any students using hand sanitizer, and they would have to have we would have to have a stand-in order from the doctor, like we do for Tylenol, in order for all students to use it. So if it could be a question that you can address to the health staff, that would be great.
Yeah, they can log all logs like that. Any kind of parent medical request like that gets logged in our student information system, and the nurse would, I'm certain, log that there.
I think you misunderstood, but like in order for the nurses to disperse Tylenol to the students, we have to have a stand-in order from our school physician.
Right.
That would be the same for hand sanitizer. So I was just wondering if we have gotten that or requested that from Dr. Boxer yet.
No, so I think that we would handle this less like Tylenol and more like other aspects that parents can opt out of or notify the nurse of if there's any kind of medical concern. And that way it comes up in the student information center system, and anybody who engages with that child can see the order that says, don't let my child use hand sanitizer, just as it would say what their allergies are or other pieces like that. Is that what you mean?
No, I think you misunderstood, but if you could just ask our school nurses if there is a stand-in order or if they are looking for one, that would be appreciative.
I think I need to understand what you're saying, though. So can you try?
Because a hand sanitizer would be considered the same as Tylenol. You can't allow students to use a hand sanitizer without a stand-in order from the physician because of the alcohol content.
This is the first that I'm hearing that we're not able to allow children to use hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
I will ask them about that. Could you get me a reference for that?
Yeah, I can. And yeah, if you could just that's why I would rather bring it up to them if you could do that.
Yeah.
I'll send you my information.
I'll tell you that I've met with the nurses 4 times in the last 3 weeks, and this has not been mentioned. And that's
Okay.
with Dr. Bloxer and with Dr. Kong as well. And we have talked about students using hand sanitizer.
Okay, so a heads up, please ask.
Anything else before we go on?
Mrs. Sinella, do you have your hand up?
Diane, while we're on the subject, if children could be exempt from using hand sanitizer, will they be issued gloves? I mean, how can we protect everybody if there's going to be a populace that aren't adhering to, for religious reasons or whatever the reason is? That could be a gap that, how do we breach it?
So, and I think that we can make accommodations where we need to. We're not anticipating that it's going to be using all kinds of hand sanitizer all the time. We are going to have protocols for kids to go to the bathroom and wash their hands, or use the sink in the classroom to wash their hands regularly with soap. That's going to be our primary means of kids keeping their hygiene in check. I'll have to look more into Mrs. Rizzo's point that kids are not allowed to use hand sanitizer. That's the first section.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any other members? Mrs. Gravellisi.
Thank you, Mayor Arrigo. We all seem to be on a hand sanitizer question today. My question regarding the hand sanitizer was the freestanding hand sanitizer stations that will be distributed throughout the building and key points. Are those going to be touchless?
I know the intention is for them to be. I don't remember offhand.
Okay.
I'll look at that.
That was my question.
The intention is for them obviously to be.
Thank you.
Dr. Kelly, do you want to address the two?
I think you just muted yourself, Brian.
Sorry. I said, Dr. Kelly, do you want to address the two Q&A questions that popped up? Or do you want to hold them for the end?
I'll note that one of them is anonymous, and just point to the school committee practices that there's not a dialogue so I defer to the school on that. Shall I move on?
We'll move on.
Okay. The next section of the report is in regard to transportation. And this is another piece that we are surveying families about. Our preliminary family survey indicated a relatively low request for transportation. But we want to see if that sustains itself as we move forward. And so the parent survey that's going to go out tomorrow will include a commitment from families about whether or not they want transportation with their child, if we are able to come back to a hybrid or an in-person learning environment. But the limitations that we have are identified in the plan, and it shows the capacity level and a diagram that was taken from the Department of Education on what the seating structures might look like inside of a school bus. The 3 areas of the city that we're really concerned with in terms of being outside of the 2-mile radius where we're required to provide transportation are Oak Island and Point of Pines in the Beachmont area, and of course North Revere. So those spaces will have special consideration in terms of transportation, but we will need to see how many families actually want to put their child on the bus to come to school when we're able to open, and how many prefer to make their own arrangements. There will be stringent guidelines. There will be a bus monitor on each of the buses, and in the diagram it shows the monitor seated behind the bus driver, but our monitors will actually be from the middle of the bus toward the back of the bus to help with management. And there will be very strict guidelines around students who don't behave well on the bus will not be allowed to ride the bus, period. And there won't be a lot of conversations with families about that. If kids are not able to stay in their seat or keep a mask on, then we're going to have to remove them from their transportation privileges. So I just want to make sure that that's very clear to everybody. Any questions on transportation?
Mrs. Rizzo.
Dr. Kelly, with transportation, if we do remote, how will we utilize the transportation staff?
So it's a really good question, and there are a lot of questions about staff at this time around remote learning. And transportation is one. Our cafeteria workers are another. Our crossing guards, and even our staff. I think if we're in a short-term remote learning model, then we actually should do everything we can to keep all staff in place so that we're ready to move into a hybrid model as soon as possible. But if it's looking like we're going to be in a remote learning environment for a long time, then I think that the committee really needs to weigh the benefits to the school district of all of the positions, whether or not it might be time to consider maintaining all of those staffing positions if we're going to be in this different kind of an environment for a long period of time. There are some people, to answer your question directly, I think there is some transportation services that will be needed, especially to bring our small learning groups to school for in-person learning even while we are in a primarily remote environment. And there will certainly be other ways that they can support us, such as helping with the distribution of meals. In our remote environment, we still want to serve meals to kids every day. So we would still want to deliver those meals to the parks in Point of Pines and North Riviera, as we did throughout the closure in the spring. We could certainly use staff to assist with that. One thing we're going to have to look at, and I'll bring up the cafeteria again, went about $500,000 instead for our food service program through the closure in the spring. We're fortunate that we had a revolving account that was able to support that, but that's not something we'll be able to support again, or even double that if it were to persist through the whole 2021 school year. So we're really going to have to think about how we're going to make that work. Even with our community eligibility, which we'll have newly for next year, we will have daily break-even points. Already done the math, check that out, based on serving about 1,000 meals a day, which is what we did through the spring and through the summer. So we can anticipate a same level of service in the fall, but it won't support the staffing levels that we currently have, which are meant to serve 8,000 kids a day. That's certainly something the school committee is going to have to look at.
Mr. Sinella.
Yes, through to the superintendent. Diane, I think it would probably be advisable to request a count of bus students who come under the 2-mile limit to see if we have to start rationing to help in the decision how many vehicles we need, how many monitors we need and everything else. I think it's chapter 17, under 2 miles, with the exception of, you mentioned North Riviera, etc. I think that would give us an opportunity because there may be children opting to take the bus that are under the legal limit that we don't have to transport. So I think that may give a better picture of if we have to cut back or curtail any kind of transportation. So with numbers, not, well, if we do this, we may have. So
Yeah, no,
again, that's
why
only
we're
a suggestion.
asking families to commit to that in the survey that we send this week.
Well, the survey, I'm not asking the parents. They may not know. They think that they're entitled to it. But it's 2.5 miles under some instances, but its average is 2 miles. So there are children whose parents may be opting to use the buses that we may have to curtail it for whatever reason. So, I mean, this is something that's not a blanket that we have done in the past and accommodated literally anyone. The
No, I know.
decision's going to have to be
And I
made.
know that we need to look at that. I think we'll better understand our capacity when we have a commitment to each family for each child on whether or not they want transportation. And then that would be our next
Okay,
iteration.
they may want it, but they may not be eligible.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I am thinking that based on our first parent survey, that there won't be a huge demand for transportation. There wasn't the first time. I think there are a lot of parents who feel like they don't want kids on school buses and would rather transport them themselves or have them walk or bike to school.
Well, the difference also is the first rainy day, first snowfall.
Yeah.
They're all going to come out of the woodwork.
Well, the one thing that we are instituting is a bus pass policy. So if the child doesn't have a bus pass, they won't be able to get on the bus. So it won't be that you can just decide on Tuesday you suddenly want to take the bus.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Rizzo?
Yes, I don't mean to back up, but unfortunately, the woman that had written the anonymous, she just put her name to the question, not realizing that's what happened. So would you mind answering that question? It's from Laura Los Mozos, and I'm sorry if I destroyed that. And it says, will teachers receive training in the platforms the district will be using, Google Classroom, Flipgrid, Padlet, whatever?
So the committee, does the committee want to vote for me to entertain questions in the middle of a meeting? This is a change in format for you, so I just want to make sure that.
I thought we were asking questions as we went.
I thought we had public speak at the beginning of the meeting, but that's why I'm confused.
Public speak would be pertaining to things that are not on the agenda, and this would be a question on the agenda.
So I think, well, Ms. Franzi, and then I'll.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, for our own sake, we should do all the questions at one time. I mean, there's only one thing left. There's only the calendar, and then let her answer all the questions so everybody gets answered. I don't think that we sort of deviate what we're doing. Let's do all the questions at the same time.
Ms. Franzi, you took the words out of my mouth. That I think we should at the end of the discussion we'll take a motion to entertain the Q&A, and then we'll go from there, because it is a little different than what we've done in the past. But I think it's important that we do maybe address any questions that may be out there.
Okay. Anything else on transportation? All right, so the last piece of the reopening plan is a draft calendar, which we've put together. You can take a look at that. You'll notice it indicates 9 days for 9 days for professional development at the start of the school year. That would be September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. The 4th is the traditional Friday before Labor Day. And then the 7th is the holiday for Labor Day. We would continue through that week with professional development and start the next week with 2 days of professional development, followed by the start of school on the 16th. And that, of course, start of school would be the start of our remote learning program. We've mapped out through, really just January, the first semester. One thing that you'll notice is we removed the half days on Wednesdays. We thought for continuity purposes that it would be better not to have those half days, especially because we are working into teacher schedules with but again, that's subject to negotiations with the union. What this calendar seeks to do is identify for parents what days the holidays are and when there won't be school. And a lot of that is maintaining our traditional standard of the half day, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and then the holiday on Thanksgiving and a closed day that Friday, vacation day. And you can take a peek at the rest of it. So we wanted parents and families to be able to plan somewhat for the year. There are no parent-teacher conferences identified here. Those we anticipate will happen remotely and be scheduled by teachers and schools on particular days with each caregiver at a time that works for the caregiver around the time of the end of the trimester or the quarter. This calendar projects 175 student days and 185 teacher days, which allows us to meet the requirements from the state and the commissioner, as well as the contract for number of days of teaching. There's one additional professional development day already scheduled on Election Day, November 3rd, and that is the joint day that we do with the 5DP, with our focus on equity and inclusion, again, for the second time this year.
Mr. Franti?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Diane, just one quick question, well, two of them. The last day we have is the 21st, but I think on your calendar you have the 23rd in June, if I'm looking at it correctly.
It's the 23rd.
Well, then we got the 21st on the calendar then.
You're right, sorry, that should say the 21st in the margin. Thank you.
Okay, and then my other question is, and from February on, we have early release. Are we still doing early release if the kids are not in school?
I don't anticipate that, but I feel like we should wait a little bit until we get further in the school year and see where we are. So we just kind of left the second year in more of a traditional schedule format with parent conferences identified, with half days identified. It might be that when we get to December, we're looking at changing the whole second half of the year as well.
Thank you.
Mrs. Rizzo?
Dr. Kelly, can you tell us what type of timeline that we will use to reevaluate the plans going forward?
I'd like to call it continuous. I think that we should always be looking at it. We're going to be monitoring the numbers that come out from the state in terms of our local numbers every single week. We have been doing that all along, which is why we started to foreshadow the issue of the 6.2 positivity rate a couple of weeks ago, which was an extreme jump from what we had the week before. And we're going to continue to monitor that on a continual basis.
I agree, we have to be fluid, but is it possible maybe if we do first quarter, let's say remote, and then a few weeks prior to that, so that there's some kind of timeline, and maybe a few weeks prior to it, look at it, see what's going to happen. That way it gives families and our educators and staff a chance to get ready for the next phase.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a wise thing to do, have some kind of a timeline. I don't know that 10 weeks we are right now, still 4 weeks from the start of school. So when you project out 14 weeks from now, I think it makes sense to say that, you know, this is where we're gonna be until maybe October 16th. I'm looking at the calendar now. You know, that week after, and at that point, we might want to make a transition if it's possible. I mean, I'm really hopeful that the work that the mayor has done over the weekend and last week is going to cut our numbers down again and reset. Hopefully, people will start paying more attention to social distancing and making sure that they are protecting not only themselves but the other people in the community. If that happens, then we can bring this positivity down. Then we shouldn't wait extra time to reopen. I think everybody really needs to start working to prepare themselves for the idea that we could be switching at any point in time. And the same thing could be true if we come back to school in a hybrid model. Everybody needs to be ready to switch very quickly to all remote if we start seeing any cases in the school department or anything like that. We really are in a state where we can't say we're going to take 12 and 15 weeks to think about how we're going to change every time we need to. But
Thank you.
that your point about having some kind of a guideline makes sense.
Any other members?
Mrs. Gravellisi has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Gravellisi, you're on my second page. I apologize. I had to scroll over.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've had my hand up all along. I was wondering why you didn't see me. My question, Dr. Kelly, is the 9 days of PD for the teachers. Will that be in person or remote? And if it is in person, how will you separate the staff to make it safe?
Yeah, again, that's something that's subject to negotiation, but we would want at least part of that PD to be in person. The staff needs to come in and see their room and see their building and see what they need and be able to tell us all of that and understand what PPE is present and understand how the building operates now and what the social distancing protocols are. And I don't anticipate that it would be unsafe at all to ask people to come in and be in a room by themselves.
Okay, so you would have them, not everybody would be together. That was my question.
We would not put, for example, I'll use the high school as an extreme example. We're not going to gather 140 staff members in one room, no. No.
Thank you.
But I mean, by way of example, Danielle, Richie, and I are in our respective offices just a few feet away from each other right now. And Doc normally would be across the hall from us, but he's on what we call these days as vacation. Not much of a vacation, but that's where he is today.
Any other members? Mrs. Rizzo?
Sorry, I just, one last thing I just wanted to ask, and then I'm completely done, maybe. So I know this will not be a popular statement, but I was, if there is remote, what is the likelihood of fall sports in our city?
That's a great question.
I mean, I look at it as if we're not safe enough to be 9 students in the classroom for hybrid, how do you put 40 students on a football field? I mean, you could probably do it with golf, you could probably tennis, but I don't know. Just something to keep in the back of the mind when we're discussing whether it be RTA or, I know it's not a popular thing, but I said it. That's me.
I know that the commissioner has hinted that his guidance will say that if you're in a remote environment, you cannot have fall sports. So there is some of that out there. I've communicated to the committee before that I feel like those are some of the things that are really important to kids, and they engage with coaches in ways that they don't engage with teachers. And sometimes the coach can really push a kid academically in a way that makes them get the work done so that they can pass. So I don't want that to be lost on us. I guess like some of the other positions that we talked about earlier, we have to think about whether it makes sense to fund a coaching program while we're in a fully remote environment. And I guess I'd say the same about clubs and activities.
I just hope MIAA meets in 2 weeks, and I'm just hoping they maybe make our answers a little bit easier and decide what they want to do with fall sports. Right now, the cancellation of tournaments for fall sports is very questionable, and it just seems like most of the cities and towns do not want to worry about the tournaments, but they don't mind having games against anyone in their local area.
Mr. Franti, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just one quick thing. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That I heard on TV today that I think the governor or somebody is supposed to make a statement about the fall sports, what they're going to do. I mean, we all know the preliminary ones, they're supposed to start September 14th, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen. But hopefully they'll come up with a statement to at least give us some guidance of what we're going to do. But it's anybody's guess what's really going to happen. Hopefully they'll give us some sort of inclination which way they're going to go today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Franti. Ms. Ty? Yeah, Ms. Ty, you're muted.
Okay now? I was going to say pretty much the same thing, that this has been an ongoing conversation in the sports pages of the Globe day after day after day. And we really need the governor to step in here and give us some guidance on this. I think that the guidance on many things has been woefully lacking. And it would be extremely helpful if we were all on the same page with this and that we knew ahead of time so that we could prepare for those things about what we want to do with the coaches. And I've been one that says that the coaches do far more than just coaching how to carry through or execute some of the plays that they've learned, far more than that. But everybody needs to know what they're going to do with their lives. And we need something sooner rather than later. So if you have the governor's ear, Mr. Mayor, maybe you could put a little bug in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ty. We've been putting lots of bugs in lots of people's ears about everything that's going on. And
I know.
I'll say this, there are obviously a lot of difficult decisions that we've got in front of us, and a lot of things that may not be very popular, but we have to do what we need to do with the data that we have. And and even so back to Dr. Kelly's earlier point around our numbers and what we've seen, that positivity rate, it's not the end all be all to as a data point for where you are, but it's really the best metric that everyone from the federal government and from the federal response of COVID to down to cities and towns are looking at in terms of kind of seeing what's happening and trying to be ahead of what may be coming in a second surge or a second wave. So when we saw those numbers of 6% positivity with all the testing that's been going on in the city, I know a lot of people think that the number of tests that are happening in the city would mean that our positivity rate would increase. It's actually opposite. So if you think of your batting average, right, the more at bats you have, the lower your average is probably going to be. And so we were hoping that with the additional testing in the city that we would actually see that positivity rate come down. And I think that was an assumption that we had. And when we didn't see it, when we saw it continue to be over the 6% marker, that was something that was really eye-opening and eye-catching. And just this morning, we have 13 cases that are new positive cases for the city. So we'll probably have, upwards maybe of 20 cases new for the end of the day. And of those 13, only one of them came from the testing site at the high school. So there's some interesting information that's coming out of that, but the testing, I think a lot of people just kind of assume that, well, there's more testing happening, so of course you're going to see these numbers increase when, our positivity rate, which is the rate at which people are testing positive in the community and that we know are in the community, that rate should be, it's for the entire Commonwealth, it's around 2%. And, Chelsea just went, just in their letter from the superintendent about going fully remote, they referenced the fact that they're at 4.8 or 4.9%. Like I said, we're at 6. And so that's a really, troubling number, and we want to see that number come down.
Mr. Mayor, I think a lot of people are confused in the fact, too, that they believe no matter where you're from, those numbers stay in Revere, which is not true. They take the address and the information, and those numbers are not incorporated into ours.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mrs. Rizzo. That is one thing that I've heard from a lot of people, and the fact is that that the people who get tested in the city right now, we know that around 50% of the people that come to the Revere High site to get tested are from the city of Revere. The other 50 are not. That the 50%, that anyone that gets tested positive, and this goes back from the beginning of all of this in March when we had our contact tracing team in place, any number that's positive in the city is vetted by state officials and local officials. There's follow-up that's done. So we're in that vetting process. We're figuring out where these people live and what contacts they've made. And so we're confirming the addresses of people. And when we confirm those addresses, we actually have cleaned up some people who have given wrong addresses, and we've been able to correctly kind of attribute them to the correct community. So there's a lot of work, and there are a lot of great people that are doing that work, and our school nurses have been at the forefront of that. And the work that they've done really round the clock and every day has been, a lot of it has been in making sure that those numbers are accurate. So while anything that includes a human touch is not going to be 100% accurate, we understand that, but we want to make sure that the numbers are as accurate as possible. And I think that that is one misconception that we've heard. And we have an additional testing site that is going to be announced today. We've worked with the state to set up an additional testing site, and that site will be down the beach. We want, at the end of the day, we want people to get tested. And I don't necessarily care if they're from Revere or not. We just know that people should be getting tested. And with the beach having the number of visitors that we have, we want people who are going to be in and around Revere to be tested. We want to know where they are, and if they do end up positive, we want them to be able to quarantine, and we want to be able to follow up with them. I hear that, and I think that it's important to have these conversations because it kind of gives everyone the ability to understand some of the details that go into the decision making. Okay. Dr. Kelly, I think we've gone through the entire reopening plan. At this point, would the committee want to entertain a motion to go through these, the Q&A questions?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. Let's take a roll call.
Mrs. Bronston Rizzo,
Sorry, yes. Can I just make a comment though? The woman that I said, was anonymous. She clarified and said she was not the person that made it. So it was my mistake when reading her email.
Mr. D'Ambrosio,
Yes.
Mr. Ferranti,
Yes.
Ms. Gravellisi,
Yes.
Mr. Sinella,
Yes.
Ms. Ty,
Yes.
Mayor Arrigo.
Yes.
And am I reading the anonymous question or not?
So we can read them.
Okay. The first question is, will teachers receive training in the platforms that the district will be using, Google Classroom, Flipgrid, and Padlet? And the answer is yes. The next question says, what about Seacoast High School? I think that is referring back to when we were looking at sample schedules. And one of our hopes when we were thinking we were going to reopen in more of a hybrid model was that Seacoast could come back full time because the class sizes are so small to begin with. But they are going to open in a hybrid model, and they're defining right now exactly what that's going to look like, because they had been more invested in the all in-person learning. They need a little bit more time to finalize what that's going to look like remotely. But they are definitely working on that. The next person says, hello, school committee. I think I missed the previous point. Were there attendee questions not read because they were anonymous? Would it be possible to read them out to the attendees? I did not realize that anonymous Q&As were allowed. So my apologies if I've done that in the past. Thank you so much. That was from Laura Los Mazos. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. And then we have a question. It says, not a question, more of a suggestion. Transportation staff could facilitate the delivery of learning materials to students' homes and food for families. And that came from Madeline Caballos. And then Laura Los Moses clarified that she was not the person who asked the anonymous question, wanted to know what the anonymous person had said, and sorry for the confusion. So thank you, Laura, for that.
Okay. So at this point, the chair will entertain a motion to vote on our reopening plan. Mrs. Rizzo?
I'd like to make a motion that on this day, that we start off with the remote plan and look into a timeline of how we can work out different plans along the way.
Second the motion.
Second.
Okay, roll call.
Mrs. Bronston Rizzo,
Yes?
Mr. D'Ambrosio,
Yes.
Mr. Ferranti,
Yes.
Ms. Gravellisi,
Yes.
Mr. Sinella,
Yes.
Ms. Ty,
Yes.
Mayor Arrigo.
Yes. Okay. All right, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is ELT funding.
So I just wanted to officially, we've talked about this at the last several meetings, but we have notified staff and families that we're not promised the kind of ELT funding that we need to sustain that program at Garfield Middle, at the Wayland, or at the Hill School. And so we are foregoing the ELT program at this time. The principals of those schools have been in touch with families. So they're aware of the changes involved here, in particular the shorter school day that they will revert to. And I think that's it. I don't know if anybody has any questions on that.
I do.
Mr. Francie?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Diane, when we did the budget originally, we allocated about 2.7 million for it. Obviously, with the ELT plan pretty much gone, is there any money out of that that we're still going to be spending, or is it totally gone, period?
That was all grant money. And we did reach out to Jesse to see if they would relax the requirements so that we could still try to do some expanded learning time work with students at a reduced rate, and they were not able to give me any information on that. They were not able to say part of the requirements so that the students in those schools do 300 more hours of learning than their counterparts in other schools, which is about an extra hour and a half a day. And we knew that we weren't going to get anywhere near, but by example, Michael, you just mentioned that our grant last year was $2.7 million. The entire grant for the whole state this year is $4 million. So we were going to be cut down in a prorated way. And so we anticipated we'd get only $200,000 from the state, which wouldn't be nearly enough to support the program. And the state was not waiving any of the parameters that we were required to meet in order to satisfy the funding. So
when the reduction, one more question, when the reduction help our budget out, or we have to redo the budget? Because we already accounted for that when we voted on it the first time.
But you were accounting for the grant money. So it's separate. That was just identified. That wasn't in the portion that you actually voted to allocate and spend. That was listed in all of the grant pieces that we have on the back of that.
But wouldn't that have to be redone now when we do the final budget, that the grant is going to be reduced by that X amount of dollars?
Let me ask Matt Cruz that question. I'm not sure, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Mrs. Rizzo. Mrs. Rizzo and then Ms. Ty. Sorry.
Dr. Kelly.
Sorry, go ahead.
Dr. Kelly, is it possible if the money is back for next school year, would we be able to reapply, or, the schools that are already in it, would they have first advantage of reapplying, or is it opened up from the beginning all over again?
We were told that there would be preference to the previous participants if the money was restored next year. So hopefully that will remain the case.
Ms. Chai?
So, Dr. Kelly, that means that some teachers will have a somewhat significant portion of their salary that they will not be getting. Do they know that?
They do, yeah. We warned them of that when we first began hearing negative budget news back in May. And we continue to update them on the status of that grant throughout the summer. Officially notified that we're not going to pursue the ELT funding. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other members? Okay, seeing none. Is there a vote required?
Nope, just informational.
Okay. So we'll move on to an update on Title IX language regarding sexual harassment.
And I'm going to pass over to Dr. Galucci at this time.
Good morning, everyone. So as you know, there's been some changes to the Title IX regulations. We received memorandum from our legal counsel, and as such, we've updated the regulations to reflect the new requirements. I had just got the the finalized version of the draft that I had sent you a week ago, with some edits from our legal counsel. And as such, our new Title IX language now reflects the regulation changes. Would you like me to field questions? Do you want me to highlight some of the changes?
Dr. Galucci, why don't you highlight some of the changes, and then we'll entertain questions.
Sure. So one of the foundational changes is that they've redefined what defines, the definition of sexual harassment, and who also works to investigate those claims of sexual harassment. So the new regulations require the involvement of 3 different individuals to address sexual harassment complaints. The complaint manager, which is usually the Title IX coordinator, that would be me, the investigator, and ultimately a decision maker. And under the new regulations, all individuals involved in managing, investigating, and deciding sexual harassment complaints must be trained on conducting investigations free of bias. So the training would be kind of a subsequent step to the language that's now found in the handbook. In terms of defining who we had in mind as the coordinator, as I said, I would be the coordinator. The investigator would serve as would be the assistant principal. The decision maker would be the principal, as ultimately, if there is any form of an appeal, Dr. Kelly would have to hear that. So she wouldn't be able to be. The new regulations, I'm going to back up a little bit, narrowed the definition of what sexual harassment is, and they've done it into 3 categories. One category of sexual harassment is unwelcome conduct that is severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive, that it denies educational access. And our legal counsel noted that this deviates from prior guidance issued by DESE that previously stated that the conduct had to be severe, pervasive, or objectively offensive. So that was a change. Our burden of proof will be a preponderance of evidence in terms of making the ultimate decision. And as I had mentioned, these regulations need to be approved by August 14th. And then once they're approved, we are required to provide training to administrators involved in the management and aspects of sexual harassment complaints.
Any members have any questions or comments? Mrs. Rizzo?
Yes, I just wanted to make a point that this is being discussed at the Policy and Procedure Subcommittee that should have started 3 minutes ago. I did ask Ms. Gravelisi and Mr. Sanella to look it over prior. So if there's certain things that they wanted to bring up to Dr. Galucci, that would be great. I kind of wish we knew that this was being done with our council, because it would have been good at this point for the policy subcommittee to sit in, because prior to learning about this, we have already done work with MASC on a policy. So I don't mind if someone else does the work. It would have been nice to have been included, but at least it will give us an idea. I mean, don't get me wrong. I want to go with what our council says, but if there's anything that Susan and Fred might want to add to, this will be done at the policy meeting coming up to a station near you.
I apologize, Mrs. Rizzo. That's probably
No.
That our legal counsel was looking at it.
You can't get fired, Richie. You have to be here.
I do just want to reiterate that Dr. Galucci had mentioned, what was the deadline, Richie?
August 14th.
The 14th. So we have that vote. We would have the vote for the handbooks, and perhaps we can, at the end of this meeting, set up something for the 14th, a quick meeting so that we can approve as a committee of the whole any, allow the policy and subcommittee to forward any of their recommendations to the committee of the whole to vote. So if people can be checking their calendars now, that would be great. And we could do something fast on the 14th. Is there anything we do fast?
All right, any other members? I do want to be mindful of the fact that there is a meeting that was scheduled for 7 minutes ago. I apologize for that, for running over. Is there any other business or any motions before the committee? Okay. Seeing no further business, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
All right. We'll
Is there
see
a second?
everyone.
Second.
All right. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.